So let's talk about the crime plan. 10 points. Obviously, public safety crime is a major concern for many Marylanders. What went into producing this, and how did you come up with these 10 ideas?
Well, the crime has become the #1 issue. I mean, it's been an important issue for a long time, and it's something that I focused on the whole time that I was governor. But it has now risen to the #1 issue for Maryland voters, and I think Americans across the country. And we're seeing increases in certain types of crimes that are making people even more concerned, and these are issues that we've got to address by working together at the federal, state, and local level.
When it comes to the #1 issue, you say you want to increase the penalties for repeat violent offenders. That was something that you attempted to do several years in a row while you were governor, working with lawmakers in Annapolis. You weren't successful in Annapolis to get that done. How would you see that planned through in Washington?
Well, that was the most frustrating thing I think about being governor is that for 8 years in a row we tried to do something about getting the repeat violent offenders and violent criminals off the streets. And the legislature continued to refuse to do that. It's still a problem, and it's still the reason why we've got such a crime problem in Maryland. Although we made some progress in other areas, those bills would make a huge difference. Some of them we may be able to address at the federal level with some of the same types of focuses on getting repeat violent offenders and going after tougher federal sentences for people that commit crimes with felonies with a handgun. And working together, one of the things we did, we tried to get the U.S. Attorney's Office, when we had problems with the prosecutors in Baltimore. Marilyn Mosby was not really focused on prosecuting a lot of crime. And so we took state dollars and hired federal prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office and had them pick up a lot of the load. When Eric Barron came in the summer of 22, we had a press conference. We brought together the federal, state, and local and really started to make a difference. And in Baltimore, where we had a targeted effort, we started to turn violent crime down in the middle of 22 when we had a new state's attorney was elected, and we had the U.S. attorney working together with the funding that we provided from the state, and we started to make a difference. But we still need to get some of those tougher sentences to get people off the streets.
In the city, and I think the U.S. attorney said it at the time, the Al Capone method. We talk about it all the time when it comes to using that effort to go after some of these repeat offenders, to arrest them and bring them in on other charges. Would you like to see that method utilized and implemented in cities across the country?
Well, there's no question it works well, and that's why we focused on it. That's why we hired all those federal prosecutors with state dollars. And I think the cooperation between the state's attorney and when Ivan Bates came in was working with Eric Barron, with the money that we provided the state, with the state police working together with all of the local governments, with the federal, getting federal agencies to work together and tackle some of these crimes, especially on gun crimes, where you can go after, take down some of these cartels and these criminal gang enterprises that are doing all the carjacking, that are responsible for a lot of the drug trade, that are responsible for a lot of the shootings and the killings, not just in Baltimore, but across the state in Prince George's County and in Montgomery County and elsewhere. I think you can really start to make a difference, and we did that. We started to prosecute people in federal courts, but they didn't have the manpower, which is why I think we put some state money in to hire prosecutors. But at the federal level, we should be putting more resources into law enforcement. I pushed a refund in 22 also. When there was people, that were reducing funding for police and they were calling for, defunding the police, I was a national leader speaking out against it and saying that we had to invest more. We pushed our Refund the Police initiative with $500 million more invested, 50% increase in state aid to local police. We should be doing that at the federal level. So a federal Refund the Police initiative where we surge additional dollars and manpower and give the police the money and the tools that they need with the federal agencies and working together with the state and local.
Do you think that would help with recruitment efforts in police departments and law enforcement agencies that are struggling?
It's a huge problem right now, and part of that is funding, but part of it is simply people that normally would have an interest in going into law enforcement. We're not giving the police officers the kind of respect and appreciation that they deserve, and they feel as if it's not as rewarding of a career. We have people that are leaving, retiring early, or as soon as they get eligible for a drop program. They used to stay for an additional 10 years, and now they're trying to get out, and we're now advertising for positions, and they used to get hundreds of applicants, and now we're getting very few. So I think we've got to continue to kind of provide support to the men and women who put their lives on the line every day to protect the rest of us. And I think they've got to get the financial support. They've got to be able to do their jobs, because sometimes we tie their hands, like with the juvenile crime bill, which I vetoed in Annapolis, which still needs to be repealed. They tinkered around with it this session, but it's still, talked to Ivan Bates, who really pushed hard to get this done. He says what they've done is not going to make much of a difference. It was a start, but we really have to repeal that whole bill, which is why I vetoed it in the first place.
Do you think there's the political will in Congress to address some of these issues and provide more funding for law enforcement agencies, go after repeat violent offenders, and really take a tougher on crime approach from Washington?
Well, I sure hope so. I'm going to try to be a champion for that when I get there. Just like I was at the state, it was an uphill battle sometimes, fighting against folks that didn't seem to have the same philosophy about stopping the violent crime. But I was up against a 70% progressive Democratic legislature in both houses in Annapolis. In Washington, it's pretty closely divided. So instead of trying to convince 70% of the people, I'll only have to convince a few to get a bipartisan bill done.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about in this 10-point crime plan was holding Senate-confirmed nominees accountable. Looking through it, you've talked about holding judges accountable, holding prosecutors accountable. And that's something that we've talked about at the state level, but what would that look like at the federal level?
Well, so we pushed a judicial transparency bill at the state because the police officers were complaining that they were arresting the same violent criminals over and over and over again for the same crimes. And they were, in some cases people would be arrested, I think on an average of 12 or 13 times. They were convicted an average of 6 times, and yet they were still walking the streets and still shooting people. So we pushed to hold the judges accountable for the sentences that they grant, and to try to have some metrics to see what the state's attorneys were doing. We had a situation in Baltimore where we had a state's attorney that really wasn't focusing on prosecuting crime. And now that's a dramatic difference now that you have one that is focused on it. But we had judges that weren't providing tough enough sentences. And it's something overwhelmingly popular. 80-some% of the people in Maryland want more transparency. And yet the judges fought it tooth and nail. Well, at the federal level, it's the same exact thing. We have federal judges that are prosecuting these federal crimes, and we do get the chance to confirm those folks and make sure that we're putting people on the bench that are serious about doing something about reducing the violent crime. And look, we've got to go after these cartels that are responsible for so much of the crime. That's certainly getting the federal law enforcement going after them helps. The folks here on the streets in Baltimore, the Baltimore Police Department, it helps give them backup. Or people in Prince George's County where carjackings are up 600%. That can really help.
Well, what would that look like to hold the federally or Senate-confirmed judges accountable? Would that be a review panel, or would there be an opportunity for the Senate to come back and perhaps revoke their confirmation?
Well, I think when you're appointing someone to the federal bench, reviewing their record and making sure that you're putting people on there that are not lenient or soft on crime if you're putting them in the federal bench. And I probably have more experience at this than anybody in the Senate because I appointed nearly 200 judges and 6 out of 7 members of our Supreme Court and judges at every single level. And I made sure we got people in there that I thought were going to uphold the law and take their jobs very seriously.
Isn't that what senators already do or should be doing?
Well, yeah, but I'm not sure, the folks that are making the decisions are holding them accountable, but I sure would if I was in that position.
Looking at the D.C. policies when it comes to working on crime, and I know there's been a lot of conversations about the rise in crime in Washington, D.C. and how that impacts some of the surrounding Maryland counties.
Yeah.
How does the federal government play a role in that conversation?
Well, we get to oversee the District of Columbia, and there are a lot of soft on crime policies in Washington, D.C. that it's now, for a while, Baltimore was a lot of the focus in Maryland, but now it's shifted to the Washington suburbs because the crime in Washington is even worse, and it's spilling over into Prince George's and Montgomery counties. And I think, the Congress does have a role. It's the federal city, and they provide the same oversight that, say, the state government would for a county government. So I think it's really important for us to make sure that we're doing something about the rising crime rate. So violent crime is up 40% in Prince George's County, I think in Montgomery County as well. Carjacking is up over 600%, and the cartels are moving in there, new gangs, new drug dealers. It's now taking, Baltimore's been a big focus. but it's getting just as bad or worse in the Washington suburbs.
What do you say to critics who argue that the policies in Washington, D.C. should be implemented by the local governments and Congress and federal lawmakers should stay out of it?
Well, that's not the way it's set up. So the federal city was created to have federal oversight, and they have committees in Congress that's their job to make sure that they're doing it.
Looking to the border, I want to bring up something that happened. We reported on it yesterday. There were ICE agents who arrested a Dominican Republican national wanted for manslaughter. They arrested this person here in Baltimore. I noticed there were some border security and asylum policy plans within your crime plan. What would that look like? And you talked about fixing the asylum process. How exactly would you do that?
Well, look, I think the most important thing we have to do, the first step, is securing that border. You know, I did a trip down last month to the border myself, and I talked with local sheriffs and with the Department of Public Safety folks from the state government, met with border security folks that work for the federal government, and learned a lot more about exactly what was going on. But since January, more than 1.3 million people have come across the border that they know of that have applied for asylum, and we're getting people from not just from Mexico or Central or South America, but from 190 different countries, people on the known terror watch list, criminal gang enterprises. It's a major source of the drug trafficking and the fentanyl that comes across from the southern border. It's terrible conditions with human trafficking and what happens with these smugglers that are taking the folks across the border. So we got to secure the border, and then we've got to fix the broken system where, we've been talking about reforming the immigration system since the 1980s, and both parties seem to say they want to do it, and yet mostly they're just pointing fingers and trying to game the system, and Republicans blame Democrats and Democrats blame Republicans, and nothing gets done, which is why I want to focus on immediately securing the border and then trying to find common sense bipartisan solutions on the actual broken immigration system. But it's a huge part of the crime that we're dealing with. You know, we're not on the border, but it is one of the crime is at the top of the list, and the border, you wouldn't think was an issue that people in Maryland are concerned about, but they are, and they are all across the country because they see that it's having such an impact.
When you say secure the border, what does that look like?
It means we've got to change the asylum process, and we can't let 1.3 million people in that aren't going through a normal process, and we've got to make sure that we aren't having people come across the border. It's just the guys on the other side are actually have more technology and more ability to break through than we do on our side, and we're shorthanded. The federal government's not able to do their job. They're hamstrung. They're not able to stop the cartels from wreaking havoc on the border, and it's something that almost everybody wants to address.
Does that look like, do you support completing more portions of a border wall that the former president talked about?
Some of it is technology, and some of it is wall, some of it is fencing, but some of it is more manpower. But they are the guys on the other side have drones and like 50,000 drone incursions that they're checking the vulnerabilities, and the guys on our side are outmanned and outgunned. And so part of it is beefing up, providing them the support at the federal, state, and local level to do their jobs. Part of it is changing the asylum process so that we don't just let all of these folks in. There's got to be it's got to be fixed. Right now the system is completely broken. I think it's probably the biggest failure of the Biden administration.
So what's your ideal asylum process?
I think we've got to find one that we can agree on, and I don't have a magic solution. I can't go in and fix it as one guy in the Senate, but I think the first step to any kind of a discussion is stopping the inflow that's completely out of control. 10 million people across that border since Joe Biden has been president. That's it's crazy. It's out of control. We can't keep up with this demand. It's overwhelming cities across America. Democratic mayors are now as concerned as Republicans on the border are. And then we've got to figure out a way to get people to sit down and actually look at not just fixing the asylum process, but the legal immigration process. It's not fair. People that are actually waiting in line and going through the process, and you got 10 million people jumping the line, and there are people we really want and need for our economy. We're losing some of the best and brightest that graduate from our universities. We can't keep them, and yet we have drug dealers and human traffickers that can come in from anywhere in the world.
Do you agree with some of the actions from Republican governors in other states, like in Texas and Florida, who are sending migrants to other cities when they come to their states?
You know, I didn't agree with it at first. I thought, you know, first of all, they were sending them to Maryland, which I didn't like at all. So they were actually dropping them in D.C. And I was talking with the governor of Texas and saying, you know, when you drop them in D.C., then we don't have a wall between Washington and Maryland. So a lot of those folks are ending up in our state, which we don't even know about. So we can't provide services, we can't help them. And but it did get attention. It did bring a lot of attention from places all over the place, including New York and Chicago and other places, that it is now something that everybody in the country is focused on. So I get the, you know, I didn't like the fact that it was sort of a publicity stunt to get attention, but it did actually change the narrative and get people focused on it, because they were just, you know, Arizona and Texas and California were dealing with the problem and nobody else seemed to care. But now everybody in America cares.
Are you surprised to hear about these nationals who are getting arrested in cities like Baltimore for crimes, or they're wanted for crimes in their home countries?
No, I'm not surprised at all, and we heard a lot of that on the border, and we are bringing in, you know, very serious criminals. And then, you know, we had a situation recently where, you know, we had Congressman Trone was, the day we had a 2-year-old shot by an illegal immigrant, sent a letter to ICE talking about wanting to close down all the ICE detention centers, 9 of them, which made no sense whatsoever. But we're letting violent criminals in, and discussing with the border security folks on the border in Texas. We were down there on the Rio Grande in McAllen, Texas. They were saying that there's really terrible criminal enterprises coming in that are much more violent and worse than MS-13. They're coming in from Venezuela, and they're ending up in our cities. And so, in case you just mentioned, I don't know the exact, you know, all the details of it, but this is happening over and over again, and it's responsible for a lot of the shootings, the killings, the fentanyl that's killing people across the country. It's all coming out of the same place.
As you travel around the state and continue this campaign, now that the primary is behind you, moving and looking ahead to the general, do you believe that this message, this focus on crime and violent crime and public safety will resonate with some of the Democrats that you need to win over in order to be successful in November?
There's no question about it. It's a bigger issue with Democrats than it is with Republicans, and that was true the whole time I was governor, when we were fighting to get tougher sentences, fighting to get people off the streets that commit felonies with handguns, fighting to do something about the repeat violent offenders, and fighting to hold judges and prosecutors accountable. It was overwhelmingly popular among Democrats, among black voters, among the people that in many cases are unfortunately the victims of crime. So it was more popular in Baltimore City and in Prince George's County than it was on the Eastern Shore or in Western Maryland. I think it's the #1 issue for Democrats, Republicans, and independents.
If that's true, why weren't you successful in getting some of these plans passed in Annapolis?
Well, because the legislators in Annapolis are completely out of touch with their constituents. And I mean, there was polling that was on every one of those issues I just mentioned. It was more than 80%, I think in some cases 87, 88, 89% of Democratic voters agreed with my position. Probably one of the reasons why I left with such a high job approval rating. They wanted us pursuing those things. But the people representing them were completely against all of those policies. And it's amazing to me that some of them stayed in office.
Is there anything else you'd like to add as we go through all of these crime plan issues?
I mean, you're covering a lot of it, Mikenzie. I mean, I just think it's a focus that we were able to get some things done while I was governor. We started to turn the crime downward in 2022 by adding $500 million more into local police, 50% increase through our Refund the Police initiative, by funding the prosecutors on the federal level, by helping to, you know, when you get a team working together with the prosecutor, like when Ivan Bates came in and started working with Eric Barron, working with the Attorney General's office, with the funding that we provided at all 3 levels, we started to make a little bit of a difference. I think we can do that and scale that up and do a national Refund the Police initiative and hold people more accountable and get people working together and coordinating more, just like we did at the state level. And I think we'll have more success passing some of this legislation at a federal level that we couldn't get done here in Maryland.
Perfect. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm Mary Bubala. Thank you for watching. Here's another video for you to watch. Also take some time to subscribe to our YouTube channel.